Okay, so I think we can begin now.
Hello, welcome everyone to the Environment and Climate Committee meeting for May. Appreciate everyone's time. I'm going to start out pulling up the agenda here. We'll do a roll call and I'll just name off in order of the agenda and just let me know if you're here. Bill?
I am here.
Kavi?
I'm here.
Kelly?
Here.
Kirsty?
Here.
Mark?
Present.
Neil? Currently not present as of right now. Peter?
Here.
Rory?
Here.
Serena Dietrich, that is me. I'm here. Tess?
Here.
Anne? I didn't see Anne. Sasha? I also didn't see Sasha. All right. So that's roll call. Welcome everyone again. Next up is to approve meeting minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review our meeting minutes from last month? Are there any comments or questions to address on the document?
No, and I'll move to adopt them.
Thank you, Bill.
I can second.
Thank you, Kelly. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Any opposed? All right, everyone adopted and approved meeting minutes for March, or for April, excuse me. Wow, it's already May. Be on track. All right, Cassie, do we move to public comment?
Yeah, maybe really quick. Well, first of all, are you guys looking at the presenter mode for the screen, or can you guys see the slide deck right now?
It says approve meeting minutes.
Yep.
Approved meeting minutes slide.
Okay, cool. I just my screen fell backwards. And then Rory, did you hear back from Neil, or did you reach out to him?
I did send him a text message and I have not heard back.
Okay. Well, just go ahead and chime in if you hear from him. But yes, otherwise, let's go to public comment. And I've got the directions here, Serena, for you to just read for
Great.
Those who are listening.
So for those of you that are on our virtual session today, you're on mute when you join the meeting. If you have a comment, raise your hand. Cassie will call your name and provide you the ability to unmute your microphone in the order that the hand was raised. And then you can click your hand again to lower it when you're done with your comment. If you're on the phone, press *9 to raise your hand and we'll be able to address you that way. And you're welcome to do that now.
And it looks like we have two comments. One, so we'll start with Kathy Flanagan. And Kathy, I'm going to allow you to unmute your microphone, and you have 3 minutes to make a comment.
Okay. Am I on the video also? Or
no, just microphone.
Okay, that's fine. So hello everyone, I'm Kathy Flanagan. I'm with the International Dark Sky Association Oregon chapter. I'm also a resident of Bend, and you may be familiar with our organization, but I'll just mention that our group is about having safe lighting at night. And we're really concerned that all environmental considerations that come before your committee and before the city include the care for nighttime hours. It's a huge, significant overlooked pollution actually. And the sky glow from the city, which is related to the lights that rise up into the sky, and are unshielded affects all of the outside environment around us. It affects the parks, it affects the, us seeing the Milky Way outside the city. We can't really see it very well here, and it would be nice if we could. So I want to offer that our organization would be willing to give a presentation to your committee in a future meeting. And we have slides, we have all kinds of things. And we have, over the last 2 years, we have been running sky quality meters in Bend at 3 different locations that have been, every 5 minutes, it takes a snap at night to measure the amount of light pollution in the area. And I thought it would be very interesting for you if you could see about that. The other thing I want to mention is that if you're out driving at night and you're over on Highway 97 going north, if you just take a minute and look at Roble Road Shopping Center, which is on the east side of the street, it's new. They have done a beautiful job with the lighting there. They have complied with all the city ordinances. The city has a 2004 ordinance on lighting policy. They've complied. It's absolutely beautiful at night. They have wonderful light, warm light, and it's not shooting up into the sky. If you look across the street at the Cascade Shopping Center, that is old style lighting, and they are grandfathered in under the 2004 Bend rules until they change their fixtures, and then they need to comply with the rules, which mean they must be shielded, they must be facing downward, and they must be warm lighting. So I just thought if you're out and about, you could see an example of it in our city. And we're doing pretty well here as far as new operations, but it's the old ones that are still hanging on there. And the lighting ordinances within the city need to be updated to include LED, the change in lighting for LED. So I guess that's all I really want to say. And I'm offering us to be able to give a presentation to your committee.
Okay, thank you. And Kathy, maybe as a follow-up, if you want to send an email to me, my email address should be on the committee's website or our climate action website. And then that way we know how to get back in touch with you if the committee decides to pursue that.
Okay. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
And then next we have phone number that's 206-498, starting with those numbers. I'm going to give you, you should have the ability to unmute your microphone, and you have 3 minutes to make a comment.
Hi, this is Diane Hodiak, and I'm Executive Director of 350 Deschutes, and this is my personal cell phone. I could not connect via computer. So thank you for the opportunity to comment, and my comments will be brief. I am a Bend resident despite my phone number, but I want to thank you for evaluating and approving our recommendations for a no oil by rail and no fossil fuel by rail resolution for the city of Bend. And I just wanted to ask you, if I know it's not going to be under discussion at this meeting, but I just wanted to ask you if you have any concerns about this being passed as it. I mean, I know you can't forecast this. You can't, read the minds of our city councilors. But if there's anything else you feel that we need to do in order to ensure that we get the resolution that we want. I guess this is probably not time for discussion. I probably have to wait for you to have that on the agenda. Is that correct?
Yeah, Diane. So
Anyway.
We have the public comment is not really a good time to ask questions and raise discussion. It's really to leave a comment for the committee members, but we are talking about the oil train resolution as one of the first, it's kind of the first main agenda item today. And that's when this committee will make their final decision on what to recommend to the council. So having heard your question, then perhaps some of them will have some comments to share during that agenda item when we have the discussion.
Okay, that's what I expected. Thank you, Cassie. So my comments are finished then.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and it looks like that is it for the public comment. So we can move on.
Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to comment on the things important to you. We appreciate that. It looks like we're ready for any updates, Cassie, that you may have for us.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we have a couple of exciting updates today. So first is that we got in the subgroup meetings in the last month, we talked about the evaluation process that we're going to go through in public meetings. We'll talk about that as one of the agenda items today as well. But I just wanted to comment, you should have all seen that I put calendar holds on everyone's calendar for when we'll have those public evaluation subgroups. Those will be over Zoom the same way that these are. So eventually you'll get a Zoom invite for those, just like we have for these. So we'll have more time to talk about that process later on today, but just to kind of point out that those are scheduled. And then a second update is that just kind of following up from that review of the rubberized chip seal question that we talked about with David Abbas at the last couple of meetings, the Stormwater Public Advisory Group also reviewed that topic. And if you remember, the motion that the committee passed was kind of that we agreed with the use of that, but kind of pending how the stormwater group felt about it as well. And they did agree with your recommendation. They recommended moving forward with using that rubberized chip seal, but they wanted to hold off in the drainage area that drains to the river, and then expressed an interest in collecting data where we begin using that so that we can better understand what potential impacts will be to the river. So that was shared with the council, and we will be moving forward with that project. And then another exciting update is that the city council adopted the proposed fiscal year 21 to 23 budget last night. So that was super exciting. And that does include the proposed budget that I had shared, some of the pieces I had shared with you all a couple of months ago, which related to the CCAP work and the ECC's work, included $100,000 to implement the recommendations, whatever recommendations you all come up with for what we want to prioritize during this biennium from the CCAP. There's $100,000 to kind of work with in order to pursue the recommendations that you all have. And then in addition to that, it included $75,000 to move forward with an electric vehicle readiness plan or an electric vehicle infrastructure plan. So that's super good news, and we're very excited about it. And then my last update, let me pull my notes up on it. I sent an email out about this yesterday so that you all had a little bit of background, but in 2019, the Oregon State Legislature passed what's called House Bill 2001, which includes provisions related to the development of middle housing, so which is duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, townhomes, and cottage clusters. And so in this law, Oregon's larger cities, including Bend, are required to allow people to build duplexes on each lot of parcel zoned for single family homes. And it also requires Bend to allow people to build triplexes, quadplexes, cottage clusters, and townhomes in residential areas. So the reason that this is important to the ECC's work is because one of our strategies in the energy and building section of the CCAP is to encourage smaller and denser housing options as a way of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So House Bill 2001, which I included some information about this in the progress report I provided a couple of months ago, but implementing House Bill 2001 is kind of one of the main tools that we have for how we're meeting that CCAP strategy, which also helps meet the state law, and it also supports a lot of our housing strategies as well. So that's something that right now we have another permanent committee called the Planning Commission. They have an actual statutory role in land use and development. So they're working with staff to actually amend the Bend Development Code to come into compliance with House Bill 2001. And so they're working on code changes, and they are looking for a stakeholder advisory group from the other committees and a couple other stakeholders that we have to provide input into the implementation of House Bill 2001. So that, I know that's kind of a lot of information for anyone who's not super familiar with the background of that, but I wanted to share it with you all because the invitation was extended to have a 1 or 2 ECC representatives participate in that stakeholder advisory group. So it's an advisory group to the Planning Commission, and then the Planning Commission will be the ones that make recommendations to the City Council. And the commitment to participate in that is really just participating in one meeting on June 14th at 5:30 p.m. in kind of like a work session format. So I wanted to see if anyone is interested in participating in that. I think it might make sense for someone in the Energy and Buildings group to do it, but if I know there's others on the committee that have either a background in this topic or an interest in this topic, so it can be anyone. So I guess I wanted to hear if anyone just kind of off the bat has interest in participating in that, or if there's any questions that I can answer about that to the best of my ability. Let's see, we'll go with the hands that are up. Rory?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm pretty familiar with HB 2001, just because my day job working at Landwatch, Land Use Advocacy Organization. And in fact, I have a coworker who's already been participating in kind of the city's code development process up to this point. So I have some background in what's gone on there. So yeah, I'd be happy to serve in this stakeholder role to represent the ECC. Also, if someone else really wants to do it, that's fine with me too. I just want to offer that I'm willing to.
Okay, thanks, Rory. Kelly?
How many people are you looking to support this? Is it just one from our committee?
It can be, I was told 1 or 2.
Okay. Yeah, I'm interested, but I certainly don't have the background that others have in this topic.
Okay. Neil, were you also interested, and welcome. We're glad you're here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, it's a miracle. Thank you everybody for your patience. I'm at Frank's Noodle House in Beaverton, Oregon, and got connected to Wi-Fi. So happy to join. And I also would be happy to participate on the energy and buildings side. So I think this is an exciting piece and an action item that is somewhat ambiguous. So I think it'll be important to have this group be represented. So just open. And Bill, you had your hand raised for a really long time as well. I wasn't sure if you had a question.
Yeah, well, first off, I think you should go to Frank's Noodle House all the time. The connection's a lot better than from your house.
Yeah.
My question was just a quickie on the budget. So Cassie, you talked about a couple of allocations for the work we're doing. I was just curious about the PV on public buildings. Is that in a separate budget? Is that in the facilities budget, or where does that come from to have the public buildings that'll get PV on them?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, we do have a couple of pieces that are related to the CCAP that have to do with public buildings, investing in renewables and electric vehicles. We do have budget in other departments to move forward with that. So for the city, so that wouldn't be public. The strategy around public buildings was intended to talk about public buildings broadly in Bend, not only city buildings. So the rest of the budget, we have a little bit for city buildings. We do have some funds. It's actually not part of the budget. We have previous budget to do some additional solar projects. And there is budget for electric vehicle charging stations and for purchasing some electric vehicles and just doing some electric vehicle planning for fleet. So we do have, budget kind of scattered throughout a couple of other departments that contribute to, the public sector elements of the CCAP. We also have a separate kind of climate action plan for the city of Bend. So a lot of it falls under that as well.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to see if there was money to do those other things. Good.
Yeah.
Good to hear.
Yeah, and maybe at another time, if there's interest from this group, I can I can talk about the city of Bend's climate action plan as well. That's something that we just got adopted late last year. And it's not something we've actually talked about with this group yet. And it might be helpful just for you all to know kind of what the city of Bend is working on too, and how we budgeted for that.
Cool. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so were there any other questions on those updates? Okay, great. So not seeing any. For House Bill 2001, we do need to keep it to 1 or 2. So maybe Rory, Kelly, and Neil, I'll follow up in an email with the 3 of you, and we can figure out which 2 of you the timing works for, and it will work the best. And I'll try to see if I can get any additional information that can kind of help with that. Okay, then I think that's it for updates.
So I think next on the agenda is the bike rack, Serena, if you're able to do that piece.
Yeah, so just to remind people what that is. It's a place for us to capture topics, both ones that came up in potentially public comment, as well as ones that you guys are seeing around your world that you think that we should potentially address down the road, whether that's in the next agenda or future, depending on the timeliness and intensity of the conversation. So I'm going to open it up to let people comment on anything that they feel from our team should be listed in the bike rack, and that'll be noted. And then we'll be able to discuss that later in our agenda planning. Rory?
Yeah, quick comment and maybe a question for Cassie too. I was looking back at some of the public comments we received in earlier meetings, and we had a couple earlier on about tree code, sort of looking at how Bend preserves trees when development happens. So I just wanted to, I guess, remind us of that we did have a request from the public to think about that. And then my question maybe for Cassie is, do you know of any movement at the city to look at that issue?
Yeah, I saw Mary turn her camera on, so she might actually have more of an update on that than I do.
Yes, I should have more dates in my head because I have heard from Colin Stevens and Pauline and CDD when that's on. It is a council goal. So as you keep hearing, we are so busy right now that things need to rise to the level of this very progressive council goals, because there is a lot. The House Bill 2001 code amendments and things related to houselessness and shelter sightings are the first thing. Those got moved forward more quickly than the tree ordinance. That I think the timing is more the fall to December because of the shelter house housing. Because they require a public process. All of these, we can only do so much at one time. So I think that's the next thing on their agenda, assuming something doesn't supplant it. It was coming up more quickly and then other things got put ahead. But it is on one, and we keep calling it the tree code, and I get a little bristly about that because what we have now is a landscaping, like where it is in our development code still has to work with the way development works. So what we call it may be different than a tree code, because I don't know that we want to create a new section of the development code, but that's something for the future. And if this committee is interested in having a member in that public process, that would be great to know from Cassie when it unfolds.
Great. Thank you, Mary, for that update. Yeah, we'll put that on our bike rack as something to watch and keep an eye out for, as just a reminder. To thank you, Rory, for that. Kavi?
I think Rory kind of hit on part of it. That was one of the issues I was going to bring up that came up during public comment.
Yeah, just one thing else I can add just for you all to be thinking about. We talk about tree preservation, but the other thing that the city's doing is work on wildfire resiliency. So you may also keep an eye on that project, because there's a connection between preserving trees and also how we make sure that we're keeping resiliency with wildfire protection, and how those two are going to work together. They can't be looked at in isolation, and that has its own committee that's moving forward. Susanna Jolberg and the fire department is working on it, but I think there may be some code changes that come out of that. So just as a kind of heads up to you all on that topic.
Well, and it would seem like as part of the energy supply subcommittee, a third layer to that is also solar access. If we're trying to talk about trees and fire resiliency and solar access, they all kind of play together.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I just wanted to add, that's okay. I just wanted to add the other one that I think also came up during a previous public comment was the HOA rule requiring homeowners in the HOA to have like a grass lawn and not be able to kind of substitute that with like xeriscaping or something that's less water intensive. So I would like to be able to revisit that in the future too, if the committee is interested in that. And I think I had another question related to the bike rack in general. Is this something that I don't know if we had decided, is this going to be something that we can kind of access as a visible thing that maybe we can't like comment there to break any public meeting rules, but at least we can see in like a certain space?
Yeah, it should be, well, I can have Cassie dive in on that specifically, but it'll be something that's part of our meeting notes and ongoing in the agenda.
Yeah, I was gonna say we can attach it. We were thinking about actually just like having it every time we talk about it. Once we have like a list there, having a slide where we have it so that each meeting we can kind of remember what those things are. But then I can also keep just a Word doc version of it in that that shared folder that we have where I've shared other resources with you all, and just update that each month.
Okay.
Because yeah, the point too is we want to be mindful, excuse me, tickle in my throat, of dates, potential dates and timelines that are needed for some of these conversations and activities that are happening. So that will be part of that document as well, in case, we can have a topic on there for a long time and overlook that it should have been discussed, 2 months ago, potentially. Hopefully that never happens, but Counselor?
Thank you. Thanks so much. I am liaison for the Affordable Housing Committee. And just yesterday, I was at that meeting looking at the slide deck for one of our affordable housing providers. And one of their pictures was sod being laid out in front of a new affordable housing project. And I thought, oh, we have a touch point in there because we loan money out for those projects. That's why they're at the Affordable Housing Committee. And I thought, that might be a place to start with xeriscaping requirements, or at least low water landscaping as an actual requirement when a project is actually getting public funding. And in my mind, that is a nice foot in the door to community-wide, where I envision more incentives to get people to rip out their lawns and put in new water-wise landscaping. So Lynn McConnell is our affordable housing director. She said that she would just toss that idea around for me. And that's what I have to say.
Thank you. Kavi, do you still have a question?
Yeah, is this a good time to also raise something new for the bike rack, or is it mainly just to bring up things from
No,
past?
yeah, anything, again, new or previous that we've discussed that we need to put attention to down the road.
Okay, so I just want to briefly mention that I would like to see if the council, if we can all, or the committee, sorry, can consider also having like a climate emergency declaration and see if that's something we can do. So I'll just read this quick part that in the United States, climate emergency declaration campaigns are operating in at least 18 states and Washington, D.C. including Iowa, Michigan, and a couple other states. And the city of Milwaukee also went ahead and passed that. So we've had something similar with the resolution, but it's not quite the same language. It's not as strong. So, you know, in a future meeting, I would love to see if we can spend some time discussing that and seeing if it's worthwhile. I did talk to someone at the city of Milwaukee regarding getting that passed and how it just helped them strengthen their goals. And it was something that helped create a culture throughout the city and throughout all departments where it put on like a new sense of urgency.
Thank you
So
for that.
I would like to add that to the paragraph.
Thank
Thanks.
you. I'll also mention that we should add the discussion from comment earlier about the light pollution, the Dark Sky Association, as something to talk about as it permits down the road. We'll make sure that that stays on our mindset as well. Good conversation on the bike rack, guys. Anything else that anyone wants to add? All right, we'll move on.
All right, so I think next is the oil train resolution. And Cassie, I think you're gonna open it up and introduce the language that we came to. And this was also in the meeting packet, so hopefully folks had a chance to review.
You're on mute, Cassie.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm like struggling with Zoom more than I typically do today, but hopefully, hang on a second. Okay. So yeah, at the last meeting, you'll remember that you all were asked to come up with a recommendation to the city council about whether to take action to address oil train safety within Bend. And you were shown a potential resolution that could be recommended should you decide to recommend something like a resolution. That was at a council request because there had been a lot of interest from the community in taking action on oil trains. So the committee had a good discussion. It seemed like there was general support for recommending a resolution, but you all had some edits and additions to the one that was proposed. So we have created some edits to the one that was proposed. We worked with Rory and Mark to help with those updates. So thanks to you both for taking some extra time to help doing that. And today we are looking for the committee to, if you're ready to make a decision about whether you want to recommend this updated resolution for the council, or if there's some other action you still want to consider that you recommend that they take in response to the oil train issue. So I'm just going to run through the changes that were made since the last discussion. And I include the redlined version in your packet, so you should have all seen it, but I've got it on the screen as well. So I'll run through the changes and then you guys can have your discussion on how you'd like to move forward. So the first change was that there was a desire to use stronger language that the city of Bend actually opposes transportation of oil by rail. Instead of, we had originally had just a little bit of softer language about expressing safety and environmental concerns. So that's reflected later in the resolution too, but we also changed the title to reflect that desire. And then down in section C, we included a statement in the findings that stated how oil train travel has a climate impact, which is contrary to our goals to reduce carbon emissions, just to make sure we're capturing that as kind of part of the justification for pursuing something. And then that was it for the findings. If we go, oh, shoot. Oh, no. Can you guys probably can't see that, right? It just says draft.
Yeah, but it looks fine in the packet. If people want to look in the packet.
Yeah, and then if you all could just keep looking at your packet so I don't have to try to re-pull this up. The other changes that we made is that down in under the section where it says the city resolves as follows, that's the part that actually says, what the city council is agreeing to do. So in section 2, we added some additional parameters to our support for the area-wide comprehensive programmatic environmental impact statement or study. The things that we included or added included assessing the mitigation and safety of environmental risks, which we hadn't included before. And then we also added a statement at the end that said, if there are any action items that come out of that programmatic EIS, that the city will review those and implement any local action. So that last part was really meant to address a lot of the concerns we heard from the community members at last month's meeting that said they wanted it to be more than just doing it, having the assessment done, but actually taking action on it if it warranted any. And then in section 3, we added that we include the supporting that programmatic EIS. We included that we would state that in the letters that we submit to our delegation. We hadn't included that yet. And then last, we added that in any legislation that we're recommending be developed at the state or the federal level, we include requiring that public information about current oil transport is included in addition to any increased oil transport. So that's kind of a summary of the recommendations. And I guess I'll turn it back over to Neil to kind of lead the discussion on how y'all want to move forward.
All right, I couldn't remember if Bill or Mark raised your hand first for a comment or an update.
I think it was Bill.
Go ahead, Bill.
Oh, okay. I think right off on the top, I think the title shouldn't have the environmental concerns piece lined out. I think that needs to be in there because I think if you take it out, I think it diminishes the importance of that part of this document. Yeah, yes, we've decided as a committee that the council should take a position that we oppose it, but we certainly aren't dropping the concern over the environmental and safety concerns. And I'd hate to lose that and the importance of that and right off the bat, because I think it says something important. Because that most of the documents around safety and environment. So that's just sort of simple at it, but I think it's more of an and thing than scratching it out. That's a comment I have for that.
And I'll make a quick kind of process comment. The goal, hopefully, in this section of the agenda is to come to an agreement on this resolution and any hopefully easy amendments like the one that Bill just proposed that we can formally adopt through a vote. So hopefully this is close enough that we can make a couple of small tweaks that everyone's happy with. But unless people are opposed to it, can we talk about Bill's comment and then jump to Bill and Covey? Or did Bill and Covey, do you have something that you think would be relevant to those conversations or that conversation?
I was just going to add on Bill's part that if kind of suggest a suggestion to make that kind of work is that if we just made it a resolution opposing transportation of oil by rail to the city of Bend due to safety and environmental concerns. So we could keep the opposing part, but also keep the safety and environmental concerns. So that was a suggestion.
Is there anybody that has an alternate viewpoint on that proposal of the language that Covey mentioned?
Yeah, that seems to cover it. It's a good wordsmithing way to do it, I think.
Okay, I'm just gonna see that nobody is raising an opposition. So then when somebody makes a motion, you'll make the motion with that amendment. So we don't have to vote on each amendment individually, if that works. And I can see most of you. So if you're shaking your head no and I don't respond, just unmute yourself and yell. Okay, Bill, did you still have or want to bring something else up or another note?
No.
Sorry, Mark.
Yeah, I just wanted to report back to the group because one of the questions that I think a few folks had was what we know about the oil, what we wanted to be able to express. And some of what's captured in this statement reflects the fact that there is a shortage of available information. And that's part of the effort to try to make it easier for people to know where the oil is coming from, where it's headed, that passes through their communities. And talking to several folks who work in this field and digging into some of the raw data, circumstantially, it does seem that most of this oil is passing directly through the state, headed to California, headed in general to refineries in Bakersfield and for use outside of Oregon. So it seems as if there's probably a very weak nexus between direct consumption and supply. Certainly markets are integrated and prices reflect total supply and the like, but at the same time, I think this is relatively cautious and there isn't any language in here that's too strong suggesting direct relationships. But either way, I think we did some homework. If anyone has any other questions on that, happy to relay what we found, but just a little bit of background.
Was part of your research, Mark, about the alternatives? Like I think we were discussing last time, what's the lesser evil? So if it doesn't go by rail, are we going to have a bunch of tanker trucks coming through the city, or what are we setting ourselves up for?
Yeah, I did talk to them about that a little bit. There certainly are other routes, and there are safer means. There was actually a pretty nice set of studies, if you're interested in this, Peter, that U.S. Department of Transportation has done on the safety of different modes of transportation. And rail is considered the most unsafe because of the magnitude of the explosions and the scale of sort of the volume that could be associated. So there's a pretty nice study they did quite recent. I can't remember the year of it exactly. I could share it if you're interested. But they go through the total volume of transportation and all of the spills and explosions and the like. And there are trade-offs across a few categories, but rail seems to generally be the most dangerous.
Thanks for diving into that, Mark. That's the background that I think we all probably, we can bring up the question and then leave it as an unanswered question, but I'm really glad that you did a little bit of digging.
Thanks.
Covey, are you wanting to comment on this or bring up a different idea? I see Covey and Mary, just if this conversation's still open, you can respond right away. Otherwise, we'll go to the next comment.
I was just going to suggest that the points that Mark just made, if you could, just what you said, I should have had my notes open to take them, and I didn't. I think it'd be really helpful for council in a transmittal memo, not the resolution itself, but to say what you just did from the committee as to your reasons. Like, why do you think this is the lesser of two evils? What did you find in your research? Because while this council may be inclined to just be supportive, there may be people in the community that don't have any understanding of the background research that you did. And it would be good to have that like in writing in the council packet when this is transmitted. I mean, just like just a quick memo from the ECC saying this is the research we did, so that it's down for the community.
Yeah, no, that definitely. And I know I put a fair amount of that into emails, and I have the documentation. I'm sorry, I probably should have had that ready. I didn't think about that, but I think that would be easy to do. And happy to do that. Cassie,
we could do it in the issue summary, but I think it's in some ways stronger coming from the committee than from his staff does the issue summary.
Okay, that's a good action item for me, I'd say.
Yeah, and just those 2 points in particular about the, I'm trying to remember.
There's sort of the supply issue and then sort of the relative risk if it's going to be transported at all.
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
All right, Covey, do you want to go?
Yeah, I had just a quick question for section 1 line in section 3 about the added line that says information about both current oil transport by rail. If I recall correctly in the last meeting, I think I'd heard that there are some safety concerns with terrorism, I think, where it wasn't able to be made public. And that's why there was that information was not it was not being made public or transparent. Mm-hmm. So I just want to make sure that's not, I just want to double check that and see if I could get some clarification on that.
Is this the section that section
yes.
3 that you're referring to?
Yeah, the purple line right there.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, Mary, did you say, I remember that maybe came from your comments from our
It came from our fire department, from our fire chief, and I think I think Rory may have had some comment on that may be the case, but we're requesting it anyway. I mean, Rory, I don't want to speak for you. I think that was an addition from you, as I recall. So yeah, that was a concern, but you know, they don't have to give it, I suppose.
I'm happy to speak to it. Yeah, I you know, suggested that edit. And I really was just thinking about that comment we heard from the fire department, because it was very powerful to me of like I believe the comment was something like, you know, we could prepare for potential hazards if we knew what was traveling through our city, but we don't. And that's the biggest problem we face as a, you know, a public safety organization. So that's why I suggested it. And if I recall, the concern about sharing exact information due to, you know, terrorism concerns, I don't remember who said that, but my recollection was that was sort of the government's, the regulators' response of the federal government as to why it's not something they do now. And I think what we're requesting as part of this programmatic EIS is research into that. Like, tell us whether that's an actual concern. How broad is it? Does it outweigh giving information to local agencies like the Bend Fire Department to prepare for things? So I would hope that could be evaluated in this programmatic EIS, that statement sort of couched in.
Well, and I think that it was our fire department that said if the information was available, they would have the concerns about terrorism or other things. Is that right, Mary?
I thought it was that's what BNSF has said to them. And I actually think, I know our departments, our water department, I don't discount that as a concern, because my own clients have said it about making specific information public. And certainly our IT departments have concerns about it. They aren't just saying it. I think it is something. So when we said to make public, to me, that's different than saying make it available to fire departments, because our fire department was saying they could prepare better, but to like post it on a website, I'm not sure that I personally would even like that anybody would know when oil is going through Bend. That seems potentially problematic in the world we live in today.
Yeah, I think that's important that those distinctions be made. Is it still in there about the fire department's comment on terrorism? Or if I just want to
No, we didn't say anything. I don't.
Good. I don't think that language necessarily should be in here. If it's someone made a comment, that's different than if it's been, you know, out there in the public. But,
yeah, no, we didn't say anything.
I also agree with you that the information be made right to the appropriate authorities, departments of the city, as opposed to being made public. I think that distinction is important.
Yeah, if I could chime in, just because I did look into this a little bit, there is some distinction here that's important about what kind of data. It comes down to whether we're telling exactly volumes and the exact timing so that someone could plan to attack a train at a precise moment. And I think what we're interested in are total volumes of transport, and maybe sort of the nature of the content, and it could be retrospective. You know, it doesn't need to be ahead of time. I think there are certainly safety benefits of having some idea, and as you say, Bill, making sure certain organizations have access if we think the risk is there. But I think ultimately this speaks to the heightened level of risk associated with train transport relative to other modes of transportation that don't have to be such large loads going through communities. So I realize there are two different things that we're trying to discourage it coming through the town, and we want to know more about it. But I think we should be careful about which elements of that risk are relevant to what we're talking about.
Covey, go ahead. We can, while we're on this topic, we can just be in discussion. So
okay. So just a quick kind of response to Mark, kind of if I understood correctly. So is it fair to say like kind of you're looking for more aggregate information and not necessarily specific, like this is a train at this time coming through? Is that kind of what that sentence there is trying to say?
Yeah. I think the risk, at least reading some commentary, some comments on rules by train associations, they're worried about having exact volumes on a schedule so that you know this many gallons is going to come through your town at 8:05 a.m., something like that. So someone could be ready to do something to it. And I think in general, the interest, and there might be others, and Mary and Cassie, I don't know the full range of the reasons the city could be interested in the information, but I think in general, we're interested in the overall aggregate level of risk, sort of the.
What if we put the word aggregate after current?
Exposure risk ratio.
Sorry, we lost you, Mark, for 15 seconds.
Oh.
If we said current aggregate oil transport by rail?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, this is different from what I thought the intent was, though. I thought the intent was to be informed that, I mean, not the exact amounts and exact time, but guess what? Load of Bakan crude is coming through your town today. That's, I mean, I don't know whether a fire department would actually do anything to respond to that unless something actually happened. But I wasn't sure. I guess I assumed that we were talking about some kind of not quite real time, basically, that we were going to get, that they were going to get information as opposed to retrospective. So it's two different ways of looking at it, and you have different responses in each one. I mean, one, I guess the retrospective says, this is the volume that's coming through here. And so this is the magnitude of preparation we should have. And the real time says, just, have it in the back of your head, fire department, that you might have, if it derails, I don't know what you change in your behavior though, as a fire department. You supposedly are going to always be prepared for something, right? So do you see my point? It's two different ways of thinking of it, and two different ways you maybe respond to it. And I guess I assumed the real time was what that clause was about. But I mean, I can see the reasons why the railroad companies aren't going to tell you. So
is there? So I agree that this was a general statement in section 3 that was, it seems like intentionally broad and not specific, because was intentionally broad, but there's some challenges with the broad statement. Do we want, as a group, to make 2 narrower asks, one about aggregate and one about safety, or can we find broad language that we can support? Because this is a pretty, can we find some sort of broad general information request or study into what information is available kind of piece, so then we can agree on this section of section 3.
So I'll just say, I know this whole thing is fairly symbolic, or completely symbolic, but I think if everyone's okay with adding aggregate to it, I think it makes it a little bit more, it doesn't have like safety concerns in terms of like making public information that's more current or specific. So if everyone is okay with that, I think we can make it more narrower.
And do we feel like the information, the safety information, specific information being shared with the fire department is a large enough need that we want to specifically call that out as well? Because by putting in aggregate, we kind of remove a chunk of that piece for the fire department note or request.
Well, I think Bill made a good point in that, like, and I don't know if this was the point he was trying to make, but this is what I heard, that, one of these requests may actually have an impact where the specific request to give information to the fire department might not actually change any behavior. The fire department is aware that these trains are going through town. The specific day and time and volume or whatever might not actually have an impact on their actions. Whereas aggregate data, the more data that you tend to have, even if this is a symbolic gesture to ask for data, the more data that you tend to have, the more education and firepower kind of, that's a bad word to use in this context, but the more power that you have to make a compelling argument in the future when it becomes less symbolic, or when it can become less symbolic. So I would be for narrowing to what Cobby said, because it has the larger impact.
I like that connection too. So does somebody want to take a stab at, maybe that's not the right term, somebody want to attempt to make a suggestion on what this first bullet of section 3 should read?
I like Mary's suggestion of just adding the word aggregate before information. So are there any concerns with that from anybody?
No, I don't think so.
So the beginning of the purple piece.
Yes.
It would read, requires railroad companies or oil companies to make public aggregate information about both current oil transport by rail and any development plans for increased rail traffic that accommodate oil transport and storage.
Does that match up with what you have been talking about, Mark? I know you kind of headed us down this way. I think it was a good path.
I mean, I guess it does depend how, is this really only, oh shoot, can you hear me okay? I'm getting unstable.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it does depend how many things we're trying to cover with this. Are we trying to only address issues that we're concerned with and we're acknowledging other issues, or are we implicitly trying to address the operations of emergency services and things like that? And I think it's not clear to me, maybe someone else knows. Some of what I've seen suggests that there is a fair amount of private information that's available for emergency services in general on this front. So I guess my point is it feels as if we should only, I'm assuming, try to address data needs for sort of aggregate issues, aggregate risk, and maybe implicitly the associated environmental consequences. So I guess I'm thinking that, yeah, not getting too specific on this front makes the most sense to me in terms of the sort of added security issue.
Does that proposal of the adding the word aggregate meet that need for you, Mark?
It seems to me, yeah.
Okay. Does anybody, I hope, I should have asked this before, if somebody's going to be making the motion, that somebody's going to have to articulate both of these points when they make the motion of adding aggregate and how we are renaming the title. Those have been the two other comments. Does anybody have additional questions or things that we need to discuss as a group before making a motion on the resolution?
So Mr. Chair, I have the resolution as amended. The only other thing I added, because you changed the title or are proposing to change the title to add due to safety and environmental concerns at the end, I also changed section 1 that says the city council opposes oil by rail transportation through or within the city of Bend and on the east side of the Cascades in the state of Oregon due to safety and environmental concerns, to be consistent with the title, because the title is just a title.
Great.
This is the actual findings.
Are there any other comments to the amended proposal before somebody makes a motion?
Mary, you've captured these in the document now. So if we make a motion, then we can just motion to accept the document as amended, right? We don't have to state what they are.
Yep.
Yeah, I've got the changes in the document now, which I will send to Cassie as soon as you're done.
Okay.
Okay, so I don't see any other questions unless
I think
you
the
had one, Bill.
good. I think the document's good. I was saying something about Mark said, and I think of a piece. Why is rail transport risky? And it's partly because railroads go right through cities, And that's one of the things that makes them so risky. And I think the other piece that we didn't mention, and I think one of the reasons that I've read for rail transport is that there's big opposition to pipelines. And whether they're safer or not is an unknown, but they tend not to be in populated areas. But pipelines are not probably going to be built. So the way that the oil industry is getting around it is putting it on a train and sending it to the refinery. So the options for we didn't really talk about what the safer options are, but that doesn't need to be in this. But I thought maybe just if you're going to put something together to go to the council to support this market, I think it's important to say, why is it so dang risky? It's just because the train's going right through the middle of town and everybody else's town, because that's where railroads go.
Yeah, and part of this is all about forcing these companies to internalize that external risk that they impose on communities, including environmental risk and climate risk. So, this does make it a little bit less convenient, and it makes it more expensive to operate. And the more of these you impose, the more it's going to increase those prices. But to some extent, it has the equivalent effect of a carbon tax in that way. So I guess my point
anybody?
Yeah.
No. Well, do you want to finish?
Want a motion? Do you
No,
want
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks.
Do you want a motion?
Okay, I would love a motion.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll make them. I shouldn't make all the motions, but I will. I'll make the motion that we adopt this resolution as amended.
Any comments?
You gotta have a second.
I'll second the motion.
Okay. Thank you, Covey. Second.
Well, really
any
quick,
discussion?
Mary, just to clarify, should the motion be about recommending this to council to adopt rather than the committee adopting?
I was just thinking that, yeah, the motion to recommend the council adopt the proposed resolution as amended.
Okay. Okay.
Will you propose a revised amendment or a revised motion, Bill?
I think, yes, you can go. Let's see now. I got to think about this one. I've made a motion, it's been seconded, and so it needs to be amended, and we can just amend it as Mary stated, and you can get a second on that. And then if you can say, does anyone oppose that? Then you're done with that.
Okay.
Okay,
so you're going to make an amendment to your motion.
Yeah, I make the amendment to change the wording of the motion to match the appropriate language, whatever it was. And
Is that okay, Mary? I can pull up.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I think everybody knows.
Why don't we
what we're
state
voting on.
it? We really do need to state it. Actually, what is the motion? That needs to be stated clearly, so we know what we're voting on.
So that you're recommending that council adopt the resolution for transport for oil by rail as proposed by the committee.
Perfect.
I second it.
Great. Now, any discussion on the amended motion? All in favor? Raise your Zoom hand.
Aye. We didn't exactly follow Robert's rules there.
It's good. We'll leave opportunity if there's we're in the spirit of Robert's rules.
Yeah, but Robert's rules would have said vote on the amendment. Then if the amendment passes, then you go back to the original one. But we essentially.
Sorry,
it's a little weird. That was.
Did we get the count of? Did we get the count of hands raised? Whoever needs to see that, Cassie.
I don't know if Peter.
I just didn't see Bill, and I don't know if Peter's here.
I don't see it. Bill's hand is not up, and it looks like Peter's hand is not up. So Bill.
Up. I'll raise my hand.
And then Peter, are you, I don't know if you stepped away.
Okay.
Are you there, Peter? So I think we have, Peter, are you there? Are you abstaining or are you not voting in favor? Okay, I think he's gone.
I
So
think
for Kayla
we
is probably
can-
the one who's writing it down.
Yeah, so does anybody vote in opposition? And then we can count Peter as an abstaining unless he pops on.
I don't think you can count him as abstaining. He just
Or
isn't-
not present,
Yeah.
not present. Okay.
There you
There you go.
Covey, Bill, and Kelly, do you want to lower your hands?
Yes.
Unless you're voting against.
We've got Peter
Peter's
back
back.
also.
Peter, do you want to vote in the affirmative?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Well, we did it. Nice work, team. Okay, well, let me get back to the agenda. Thanks for everybody's hard work on that. That is when both this and the rubberized chip seal are two. I just want to recognize success for the committee. These are two things that have been brought to the committee that have been discussed, researched, and then a proposed motion that we've done our job on. So congratulations, team. Okay, so next we're going to jump into the evaluation process and criteria. Do we want to start, Cassie, with the timeline? I'm trying to remember how we talked about going through both of these pieces.
Yeah,
Yes.
Serena was going to do this part, but Serena, if it's helpful, I can pull up that timeline. Do you want me to do that
If
or
you don't
to
mind,
start?
I have, yeah, for the timeline piece. And I just want to remind everyone, I apologize, it was last minute, but I have to jump off at 12:30. I don't want to rush this conversation, but there are things that we need to get through today. So Neil, you weren't there when I had said that earlier. So I just wanted also you to alert you that I have to jump off at 12:30.
Copy, thanks.
Can tag in for me if you don't mind, if we're not done with this conversation by that point. All right, so I think most of you have seen this timeline before. It's really just categorizing the work that needs to be done. The top portion is stuff that we're handling in this session in the public meeting sectors in our monthly meetings. And the content underneath the monthly timeline is stuff that we've been independently working on as we kind of try to really dive into the details. So we're currently in May. The idea for today is to finalize the prioritization criteria, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, and vote that in place. And we're also going to discuss the approach for the evaluation of the strategies. And that's the part that I'm covering as well. And then as a group, we'll do public meetings between now and our June meeting that focuses on those identified areas as discussed previously, those subgroups. So as Cassie mentioned in the update, you should have all received a hold for that conversation, and we'll talk more about that stuff later. But is there any questions on this timeline and as we move through the stages? I'm getting no comments, no questions. All right. So we can probably take that timeline out, Cassie, and bring up the template for the evaluation criteria that we are working towards. So I think this is something that has obviously been on a lot of people's minds. We've been researching a lot of information, diving in, the categories for the CCAP really closely, but how do we really define and how do we actually put, a value to these strategies? There's been a lot of work done. Tess has been instrumental in helping to create this document for something that we can present today. So I'm also going to lean on her to talk through the process. But ideally, this is a view specifically for energy supply. There would be a document for each of the categories to work through. So just a quick high level, there's several tabs within this document. There's a guide tab, which gives you clear instructions on how to work through this document. There's a results tab, which will literally just calculate the results when you're done. So you don't necessarily need to do anything on this. This will be a view only tab. And then there's the priorities and constraints. And the constraints is the part that we haven't really talked about yet as a committee. Let's go to the priorities tab really briefly. So one of the things, and again, we're going to have a conversation around this, but I'm going to kind of just talk through this document as it sits right now, and then we can open it up for discussion. And remember, each group will have its own document relating to the information in their sectors. But so for energy supply, the criteria, the priorities at the top are something that we're going to talk through later, that Neil's going to walk us through and really focus on what those should be. Are they currently the right ones, and are we missing some, and whatnot? So that'll happen down the road. So let's not focus on the content within those specifically right now. But the idea is, as a group, you have the ability to weigh those on your end in 1 through 5. Or 0, I'm sorry, Tess, is it 0 through 5 or 1 through 5? I forget which way. It's
Yeah,
1.
0 through 5 can work. I don't know. Did I write 1 on the guide?
No, I just didn't look. It is 0, right? You can weigh more than 1, the same weight that you want. And again, all of this information is in that guide, in that instruction log. You have the ability to weigh, more than 1, the same. So as you can see, all of them are 5 right now, but you can have a couple that are 5, a couple that are 1. That's up to you. We're not putting any constraints on what that looks like. And then you would go through the process based on your research, talking through each person would fill this out on their own and talk through them as a group in the next session. I'm going to move you to the constraint tab for a quick moment.
And I'm sorry, can I jump in?
Yes, Tess.
Sorry, thank you. I just wanted to clarify the difference between the weights and then what you're entering in down below. So the weights is the idea that you can subjectively weigh or value those priorities. And then the ranking that you're entering in, like rows 5, 7, etc., are your objective, basically based on your research, where you think that strategy is at in regard to the priority. So ranking is both an objective and a subjective process, but this tries to keep them in separate buckets and then combines them for the final ranking.
I will do a quick demo. So if you can change your weight, so everyone has the ability to weight based on their own value. And then you can, so those will stay like constant, whatever you want. And then you can rate this strategy against each of those. So say equity is a 5 to me, but I think that the 100% renewable electricity supply is like a 2 on equity. Then what that does is it's like a multiplier. So over here you have the sum, and then simultaneously, if I think, say I thought supporting long-term progress was not important, so I've given that a 2 in a weight, and I thought, but I could say, so I think that's not that important of a thing, but I think that this strategy does that, then I might give this one a 5, and then that's weighted, so that one actually also would add like 10 points, if that makes sense. So the first step would be to go through, decide how you want to weight each of those. And I think probably the best way, I don't know how you wrote it in the guide, Tess, was it like everyone picks a 0 to 5 or a 1 to 5? So the weight can have a 1 to a 5. So you can say GHG is a 5, equity is a 5, everything else is a 3, for example. And then you just do that first, and then you go and you actually, pick your weight for each of them. So I don't know if that demo was helpful, but
thank you guys. Sorry, in my head, everything's so clear. So I'm glad I have you guys to help define this for everybody. So weight it first based on what you're thinking you feel is of importance to you. And then you would go through and categorize and monetize those with each row in the sections below. And all the calculations should already automatically calculate for you, so you don't have to worry about that part. We'll talk through that a little bit more with questions. And I wanted to go to the constraint side, which we haven't talked about too much in this group, but there's been things that have been coming up as we're doing research that aren't priorities, but they are things to consider as we're trying to evaluate these areas. So there's additional resource needs and potential level of funding and receptiveness to the community. And again, some of those, they don't have specific monetary or dollar amounts or numbers associated with them, but based on your research to date, there should be some level of understanding of how those are going to impact each of these strategies. So again, you would put weight to those constraints, just like you would to the priorities. The process is the same. You're putting a weight. So if you think level of funding deserves, a lot of weight, that's going to really create a trigger on if we can actually execute or not. That would get a higher weight than potentially community receptiveness. So those are the considerations that we put in here to start. And again, those calculate out the same way and would, in the results tab, formulate kind of the final rating as you work through the process. Bill, you have a question?
Lots of them, but sorry, but
You're fine.
Is there? Am I not muted? No, I'm not. Okay. So is there if you think of another constraint like the city's ability to actually influence it, for example, that's a constraint. Is there a room to add them at this point, or are we going to stick with this?
We definitely want to have that conversation, but we also were careful that the priorities don't, that there aren't conflicting areas. So if the priorities already consider certain things like partnership, I forget the actual priority, but it's partnership. I forget the actual, but I consider that kind of under that partnership piece where, if there's already players to help with that strategy, whether that's a city or another entity, that would be under that sector. And I guess resources is fairly general, but I would consider that as a constraint. If I know internally that there's currently no resources available for a strategy, that probably isn't going to get a very big score. And resources being obviously other than funding, but other things potentially, partnerships and other areas.
Yeah, no worries. On that, that was one that kind of came up several times when we were talking about our strategy, about whether the city can actually affect an outcome. So as long as it's fit in there somewhere. This is a great matrix. Thanks for doing that.
Tess, could you maybe speak to how the constraints, how the summing happens, like how they get subtracted?
Yeah, thanks, Cassie. So this is on the guide tab, but it's super important for the priorities. If you think that a strategy will achieve or can support one of the priorities, you give it a high ranking, so upwards towards 5. On the constraints tab, if you think that the constraint identified, such as the level of funding, is going to pose a barrier to the implementation of the strategy, then you also give it a high ranking. And then what happens on the results tab is the aggregate of your priorities, or sorry, the aggregate of your constraints gets subtracted from the aggregate of your priorities. So the constraints is going to be a negative item. So you want to make sure that when you're on the constraints tab, if you're thinking something is a problem, you rank it high.
So like community receptiveness, for example, if community receptiveness was a problem because there was not a lot of receptivity in the community, you would still rank that one high because it's like a high barrier, basically.
Correct. So the goal for today, because this is a document that we're going to need to utilize for our sessions coming up in the next couple of weeks. The idea is to kind of come to an agreement that this tool is functioning with the needs that we have today. And then we can move on to focusing on the priorities themselves and the language around the priorities that Neil will take over.
Yeah, so just to reiterate that, we have 2 different sections in the agenda and 2 different action items. One is this process. And so understanding the process and agreeing to this being the tool that we'll be utilizing in our evaluation. And then the second is coming back to that conversation of what those priorities are. And Serena, would that also be a space to talk about constraints, since this is a new, to agree on what's going to be in those columns for priorities and constraints if things came up in our subgroup meetings that we need to modify. So then the goal would be, we have a process approved, we have a list of constraints and priorities approved, and then we'll have that tool be available to actually start using in our evaluation before the next meeting.
Correct. Thank you, Neil.
And then so what the next steps?
Know that you're not here for that much longer, but so just let us know what you need.
Thank you. Rory?
Yeah, I think it's a great process, but one concern with these constraints and how they'll subtract from our priorities, to me, that means they're functionally also evaluation criteria. So I'm just wondering if we should add them into the proposed draft evaluation criteria that we're going to vote on later.
I think yes. It was recognized that there was an omission, or there was a kind of a big gap in what you would, if we just talked about the positives and didn't mention the criteria, the constraints in the evaluation criteria, then we would have ended up with a potentially lopsided list of projects that wasn't encompassing everything. So yeah, we'll talk about that and vote on that in the second piece.
Wait, would you repeat? So what is it that you're suggesting, Rory? Moving them or not moving them?
No, it was just a concern that in the second vote that we'll have shortly on the proposed evaluation criteria, if we're including these constraints as part of our evaluation that affects how we rank these, then they are functionally also criteria, and that we should add them in what we're voting on as our evaluation criteria. And it sounds like that's sort of what Neil's going to propose when we get there. So I'm happy to talk about it then if we need to talk about it more.
Well, to be clear, would the suggestion be to move everything into an evaluation criteria? Because that was actually one thing that we talked about, like, do we just expand the evaluation criteria to consider some of these things? I think the idea, or would you add them as evaluation criteria and also still do the constraint exercise? Which are you proposing, Rory?
I guess I would add them to the evaluation criteria, because in this system, as I understand it, that we have set up, where they will sort of subtract from how we rank using these criteria, then they also themselves become criteria. So just for like clarity of process and transparency, I would rather include them in that list of evaluation criteria.
And then eliminate the constraints exercise. Like, well, so we would just have the one set of evaluation criteria.
Mm-hmm.
That's one way to do it. I think how it works on the spreadsheet, like, is fine. I think we could keep the exercise of doing them separately, like your sort of positive priority criteria first and then do your constraints, but I would just add those constraints to this list.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it would still function the same, but we're still calling them evaluation criteria, to be clear.
I'm trying to shut my mouth. I'm trying to hold my mouth because I have a little concern, and I think it's addressed by what you're suggesting. Because, okay, we have some of the actions are to try to change the way people are viewing the kinds of actions we want to do, we want to see happen. And so if we don't have a lot of receptiveness by one portion of the community, say like builders, they're part of the community, but we really need to change the code or some element of it. It's sort of working cross purposes. It's saying, well, the community's not very receptive to this, but one of the things we need to do is do this because the community is not receptive to this. So it adds a negative element to something you want to achieve as part of your priority. So I think I kind of like the idea of moving it back into the general set. I get what you're thinking is, though. It makes some sense too, but I'm a little concerned about what might happen with the signs relative to how we end up prioritizing it.
Tess, did you have a question or a comment?
Yes, I mean, I guess the only thing is there's a little lack of flexibility in this solution to your comment, Bill, but the solution could be if you think that community receptiveness is not important to the strategies that you're ranking, you just give it a 0 in your weight.
Okay, and I guess, okay, that would be a different way of thinking about it, wouldn't it? Because you'd be going, well, how important is it, is when I think about the community's not receptive to this. Is that, if that's really important, then you give it a 5 that they're not receptive, then it's going to make a really big negative number over there. Mm-hmm. So we got to make sure it's the old double negative. You got to be careful of double negatives. Yes. You can really get crazy trying to do that. Which way do we go? I think moving it back the other way might help.
Did we lose Serena because it's 12:30?
It looks like it.
Okay. So just as a reminder, and this is, feel free to chime in, Cassie and Tess, if this is your understanding of it. That conversation that Bill had, I think, is exactly the kind of conversation we want to be having in the next step of the agenda, which is agreeing to the evaluation criteria. But we would love to, and this piece that Serena introduced and Tess built up is the process piece. And so do folks have questions? And I know that this was not thrown on you, but we haven't had a long time to work through this. But are there other questions that folks have about this process? I've been really impressed, and the demonstration that you all did today was also helpful, even though I saw this before the meeting. So, but do people have other questions about this process going forward, or amendments that you might want to make, Covey?
I do. Thanks, Neil. So I think my larger question is, I just want to try and understand how we're using this. So I think the constraints part that was added is really helpful too. But overall, so is the process of this is that each of the subgroups uses this for their own kind of category, their own part of this, their area, and each of the members does it individually, and then they come back to the larger group, and then what is the whole process envisioned in terms of using this?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So the idea is that this template we would send to each of you after this meeting, once we all agree. And then you would each just do it individually and send it back to me. And then when we go to those public evaluation meetings, what I would have teed up is all of your results kind of on slides. And then we would have an aggregate. So we would basically add up the results. the aggregate of your subgroups. And then that would give us a starting point. That doesn't have to be the final list for each group, but it's a starting point to see, okay, based on each of your individual priorities, this is collectively what the subgroup prioritizes. Then during the subgroup meeting, you would each have an opportunity, like 5 or even 10 minutes, to go through your scoring and explain to the other committee members kind of what your rationale was in that decision. And then there will be a long period of time for the subgroup to discuss what that final aggregate list looked like and decide which of the priorities you want to bring back to the full group. So if you guys look at that aggregate list, and even though it was a collective of all of your individual opinions, if based on the discussion, you collectively feel like you want to move some of them around, that's fine. You'll have an opportunity to do it there, but at least it gives us like a starting point to do it.
And just to follow up, thanks, Cassie, and just a follow-up question on that then. So in our group, I don't know if all groups have done this, we've kind of split up the strategies between the group members. So I have two, I think each member has 2 strategies that we're focusing on. So I have a lot more information on those strategies versus the other ones in terms of what they've done research on. But when we're rating it, we're doing it all the strategies, not just the ones that we've researched. Is that correct?
That was the intent. I think if the committee feels they want to do it otherwise, you may, but that was also the purpose of you all getting back together and sharing the information and the research you've done, is so that you would be able to each go and evaluate yourselves. That way we have more, more people ranking each strat. Otherwise, it's kind of like one person's opinion on each one. So it would be, I think, better to have all the members of the group be able to evaluate all the strategies.
And the end goal is for each of the subgroups to come forward with their recommendations for priority.
Yep. So in June, like in a month from now, the subgroup leads will report out from each of those public evaluation groups and say, this is our top 5. We haven't decided exactly if we want to just do the full ranking or just put forward the top 5. So that's something we can talk about too. But yeah, so that would need to be prepared. That would be ready by the end of the evaluation meeting.
And a clarifying follow-up question on that. So on that meeting, we're going to bring all of them together and kind of start breaking down the groups again and kind of just going a listing of everything, all the strategies.
Yep. So at the next meeting, we would get to see what the priorities were in each sector, basically, and then have time to discuss as a group, how we feel about that, what other information we all need in order to come to, a collective decision. Because the idea is that by August, you all make the decision on all the priorities together to recommend to the council. So you'd have the July meeting to further deliberate on that, and then with the final decision in August.
Okay.
So basically in June, we'd have the starting point. Okay, each of the subgroups, these are the collective priorities of all the subgroups. Therefore, here is the list of what you would likely recommend to the council based on how each of your subgroups evaluated it. But you'll have the July meeting to deliberate on that and shift them around so that you can all kind of weigh in on the other groups as well.
May I paraphrase, try to attempt to paraphrase this? What the okay? So once we decide on this, the actual process form here, which looks great, but we'll each individually do our weightings and our rankings, correct? And we're going to submit them to you, Cassie. Then you will in turn supply. And we will do this on only the groups that were the subgroups we're in.
Mm-hmm.
Correct? Not the other ones, just the ones we're in. Okay, then you will then in turn compile them for each of the members of the subgroup and return it to those members. And compiling means you're going to see each person's ranking and then an aggregate ranking. So it's what they all actually sum up to, with all the numbers multiplied, however people decide they're going to be. And then from that, we'll have to kind of go scratch our heads and go, okay, what are we going to do with this? And then we do that in what does this mean? Hopefully people kind of agree. But if they don't, then we have some stuff to work out in our public meetings. Is that but we'll have the information ahead of time, right, before the public meeting?
A little bit before. It's a tight timeline for sure. I mean, if by the end of the meeting today, if we can't come to a process that everyone's comfortable with and the criteria that everyone's comfortable with, I would actually recommend that we push those meetings off another month, because yeah, it's basically in 10 days for some of the groups that you all would be, making your subgroup recommendations.
Yeah, we're not going to fill some of those gaps in that time. If we have gaps in information, it's not going to happen. So you have to vote on your intuition or something.
Well, we'll never have perfect information,
Exactly.
right? And I think as information evolves, if we had one of those meetings afterwards, the process, we're not finalizing these, we're operating off of the best information we'll have when we fill these out. There will be further opportunities to weigh in, and if we had a meeting with somebody and they said, oh, actually this action caused a giant increase in emissions and it's horrible and you're wrong, then we could bring that up in a later meeting as a part of the process. So Covey, did you have another comment or question?
Yeah, I just had a personal kind of thought, is that I do think this is helpful as a kind of guiding rubric. And I think it's helpful to have this objective framework. I think I raised this in the last meeting too. I think my one concern is also, I think having an objective rubric is helpful in terms of kind of making sure we're not falling into any biases that we have. But I also think some of the information as we kind of rank it, there is a large subjective component to it, which I know we can kind of adjust based on the ranking. But I think at some point it can also fall into the other side of we're adjusting a rubric to fit kind of what we think is more important, almost kind of like doing it backwards. So I just worry about kind of relying on it too much, and then having to spend more time trying to figure out how to get it to fit what we already feel is more important, if that makes sense. Just because we also have a lot of evaluation criteria too.
Yeah, and hopefully there will be the opportunity for that conversation to happen in the public subgroup meetings, of seeing those evaluations, and really trying to understand, like, what were you understanding about this that made you think that this was X, Y, and Z? And what I've found from going through these processes is that oftentimes you come to more understanding just and actually did agree, but there was something that you just weren't factoring in or something like that. So I hope that we can, I hope that this can be the best of both worlds and really does put weight on both the objective and the subjective in a positive way. And yeah, it's definitely always a challenge in how these are built. Do I want to make sure that we have time to discuss the evaluation criteria? Because I would really love for us to be able to vote on both. Do folks think that this process-wise, this evaluation template, I can't read that small of text, but that this tool and process makes sense and we can approve that process going forward? Does that need a formal vote, Cassie?
It's up to you all. If you feel like you'll feel better about making sure everyone agrees.
I think it's
not like a legal reason.
I think if people agree, I'm happy to not necessarily have a formal vote, but just know that this is going to be the process that we'll be evaluating with, and then we're just going to be discussing the evaluation criteria if this process works for folks. Bill?
I'm sorry to keep asking. I like this process, and I think what you've created is really good. I want to make sure that I completely understand when I'm ranking something on the especially the constraints. I mean, I've done the other kind lots of times, but I've not had the subtractor. So I want to make sure we're all thinking of this the same way on the constraints and how we rank it. So a higher number in the constraint makes a larger negative number, which is going to then subtract from the ranking of in the other on the other tab on the
Yep.
priorities.
Cassie, would it be helpful to do a quick demo where you just use the number
I get how it
5?
works. I get how it works. I'm just trying to make sure that I'm trying actually more meta level on this. What's going to happen when we to our ranking if we aren't we have to think about it all the same way. I am actually concerned about what's this a little bit. I kind of like I sort of like almost like the idea of putting these back over on the other page, on the other tab under the priorities.
Could I just kind of offer a suggestion that I think might work, because I was thinking about that too. I do like having the constraints separately because it is something that is like the cost of it or the community part of it. Kind of, I think it helps to see it separately. But one suggestion I may have is instead of having it automatically subtract from the priority score that we get, just having it be a separate number to kind of also consider, because right now I think one thing I'm already seeing is we have 3 constraints and like 5 to 8, I don't know, evaluation criteria. And I think automatically the constraints are given a lot more weight because there's 3. So each one is just worth a lot more. So I think if we just had 2 separate scores instead of having it be automatically negated, would help, because then we can kind of weigh like what that means compared to the other for each strategy. And it will make it easier to do the calculations too. So it's not a negative like Bill was talking about.
So like showing your work on the results page where you'd have the kind of sum ranking of your priorities, a column for a sub ranking of your constraints, and then the net thing that it's sorted by. Is that what you're saying?
I would almost say not seeing it as a net score, like avoiding the net score part of it, just having some total of the priority score of it, and then this is the constraint score of it, and just having 2 separate scores to kind of keep in mind and kind of weigh as you would, depending on your strategies and your group.
Go ahead, Tess.
Yeah, no, I think Kavi brings up a really good point about the lack of balance between the priorities and constraints. I can normalize those numbers so that basically on the priorities you divide by 8, and on the Bill, is this too in depth? I can normalize the priorities by dividing by 8 because there are 8 priorities, and I can normalize the constraints dividing by 3, so that basically you don't get the priorities being more heavily weighted than the constraints. But I think the 2 columns is great too. I just didn't know if the normalizing would help.
I guess I like the Kavi's suggestion because it actually says something more. It doesn't blend the numbers. It says, we think this action is really important, but we also see that it has a lot of constraints. That's a statement. That's an important statement. Whereas even if it's weighted or normalized, it's going to blend into there and it make something that we think is really important not look as important. Whereas having the 2 separate numbers says very important, going to be a lot of problems to get this one done, or vice versa, right? Not so important, easy to do, no constraints. And I actually think that's a really good suggestion and actually will help us going forward. And we don't really lose. Actually, you don't have to change much other than not sum the 2 together, which is also nice. I don't know what other people think about that, but I really think that is a great suggestion because it says exactly, well, I've said it twice, so I don't need to say it again. I need to shut up.
It would also I think it would allow you all to weight the barriers differently. So there could be some strategies where the constraints are high, but you feel like the impact is big enough that it's worth working through those and others. So I think Kavi's suggestion, I think, seems to address a lot of the things that have been brought up, but allows flexibility to continue, to apply it further. If you want to subtract it down the road, you can, but we have it separately. I do, just as a quick time check, we only have 14 minutes left, and it is important. This is a very important discussion. I don't want to cut it short, but I just want to call out that if we get to the point where we have to cut one or the two conversations short, then we'll need to decide if you all want to, if you feel ready to do the evaluation meetings, in the next couple of weeks or not, or if we don't feel like we're there yet. So.
Am I back?
Yeah.
Okay. My battery's dying, so I switched to my phone. Hold on a second. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
As Ann Berkey? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. I had to switch to my phone. But yeah, so I heard time constraint, and then didn't hear anything else.
It was just pointing out that if there's not sufficient time to finish this discussion and the evaluation criteria discussion, because it's important that everyone feels good about those, that I just want the group to think about if they're ready to move into that evaluation phase, within less than 2 weeks, basically, or if you all want more time at the next meeting to continue the conversation. I think he froze again.
I froze again. Can you hear me now? I'm so sorry. Okay.
It might be dialing in. Just listen.
Yeah, I can. The only challenge that I have is I can dial in, but I am just a participant. I can't talk.
Oh. Well, I can allow you to talk. I will be able to allow you to talk. You just won't be able to share your screen.
I don't know if on the phone you have the option of switching audio to phone, where then you get the participant ID. So you can, I actually did that myself.
Oh, I don't know how to do that. Okay, it kind of looks like, I think he might have lost connection. So while we're waiting for him to come back, does anyone have any more thoughts or questions on the process that we've been discussing?
I'll just add that I'm supportive of the concept that Covey put forward of doing the separate calculation. And it sounds like we don't need a motion on this priority, but I would hope that we could, if other folks agree, maybe we could agree to do it that way and spend a few minutes on the next portion of our agenda.
Maybe we could do a little show of hands or something, just.
Yeah, why don't we just raise your Zoom hand if you feel comfortable with the process, including what Kavi described about separating the constraints.
Oh, gosh.
I think we can hear you, Neil.
Okay, well, thanks for letting me know. I'm glad I'm not swearing. I can hear you all. I just, I can hear you. And my Zoom hand is figuratively raised.
Okay, I just don't see hands from Mark. Mark, do you have any comments or concerns about the process?
Sorry, no, I'm good. I'm sorry that I missed that. Yeah.
Okay. And
Sorry.
Tess, I don't see your hand.
Oh, I'm just not a voting member, so I tend not to vote.
Oh,
but
that's right.
I'm happy making that change.
Okay. Okay, cool. Well then, Neil, we can move on to the evaluation criteria.
Great. So this is where hopefully we could have some of those discussions like Phil already brought up about anything that came up during the last month of working that can, if there was anything that came up in the evaluation criteria that you'd like to modify or add. And some of those pieces that did come up that have already been addressed was the constraints piece. So it's because I can't see anybody until I get reconnected. Kathy, will you kind of call on people and help lead that discussion?
Yeah. And I'm also sharing the the memo. Are you guys looking at the memo with the evaluation criteria? Okay. So the one that was added was this one about avoiding missed opportunities that was suggested at the last meeting. So does anyone have any thoughts or things they'd like to add or change? Let's see, I see Mark. Oh, did you take your hand down?
Yeah, I'm fine. Sorry.
Okay, Kavi.
I don't know if Peter was ahead of me.
Oh, Peter, sorry, I'm just looking at the, Peter, you can go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's okay. For what it's worth, I mean, it's a tough one for 8 minutes or whatever we have, but I have a kind of a love-hate relationship with the criteria of affordability, because I often find it used as a tool against promoting energy efficiency, or in my world, better building practices, or all kinds of. So I don't know, I don't have a solution, but I get concerned if an evaluation criteria is affordability, and that my understanding is that we're trying to achieve more affordable housing, and I am completely supportive of that, but just that it doesn't become a double-edged sword for us. So just open for discussion.
Councilor Campbell, did you have a direct response to that?
I know I'm supposed to stay out of this, but Peter, I just think that's such a good comment. One of the things I've been thinking about when we talk about is affordability per purchase versus affordability for living. So, for example, an energy efficient home might actually, that purchase price might be a little bit higher, but literally not the month-to-month cost, which is really what affects people, is their mortgage plus their energy bills. I'll go back to just being quiet like I'm supposed to. Thanks so much for this. It's really important and it's really hard. And, you know, it's just a really great discussion.
So the way I see it used against energy efficiency or sustainability is, I think just putting simply affordability down may not be nuanced enough, because there are ways to create affordability and still do the hard work of sustainability, size of homes, all kinds of things. I'm just worried about that simple word affordability sitting there. The building industry will push back very hard saying, well, you said affordability was important, so we need to not force builders to do such and such and such. My argument would be, well, you know, if you made that house 200 square feet smaller, you could afford all the sustainable things, no problem. And then somehow they can find ways to put, you know, stainless steel appliances in. That's not a problem. So I'm just putting a red flag on that word sitting there so that it doesn't get used against what we're trying to accomplish.
Javi?
I just wanted to jump in there and kind of, again, propose something that I was thinking about that too, is we already have advances equity. And I was wondering if we could do like a advances equity / equitable sharing of burdens or something along those lines that kind of talks about affordability and just kind of includes that and integrates that in all the actions, not just in housing, but kind of considers the impact of any strategies that we're doing in terms of equitably burden sharing and the impact of that. I don't know if I conveyed that very well, but so I wonder if there's a way to kind of combine those bullets, because it is, I think, again, part of equity. Affordable housing is, you know, to me, again, connected to equity.
Councilor Campbell, your hand is still raised. Did you have something else? Oh, okay. Bill?
Both points are really good. because some of the actions are, they go the opposite way. But you think about trying to have 100% renewable energy supply in electricity. Well, that's not going to be, that's going to go the wrong way. It's very possible it's going to go the wrong way as far as in terms of rates. So somehow, but the part where it ties in is somehow you have to address affordability in that particular action. I mean, I suppose there could be individual actions around affordable living where then those would, that would be a little different as opposed to having, or you can weight them. And that's a tough one. You say, okay, affordability is low weight. Well, it isn't always, and it isn't a low weight if you can't afford stuff. So I get why it's there, and I get why equity is there, but some of these things are in opposition to each other, the actions. So Peter has a really good point, and it can be used against us in the city and all the efforts if you aren't careful of the way we treat affordability, the concept or the evaluation criteria of affordability. It's a subset as opposed to maybe a direct, except for certain actions, it's a subset versus a most important criteria. I don't have an answer.
Neil, are you back?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Just process-wise, I'm curious if we could maybe like marathon here folks that have either an individual proposal or modification so we can think of them all in the aggregate, since we don't have very much time, because it's hard to manage back and forth conversation on one topic and then not get to another. So can we start with that? So we've had some conversations about some of the challenges with affordability fitting into these as a list of priority or draft evaluation criteria. Are there others that folks want to bring up as well? And we'll hold conversation on them for a little bit later for the next minute. Kirsty?
Yeah, I'm wondering if a couple of us, and I'd be happy to volunteer to do this, is to spend, another hour on this outside of this group to kind of flesh these out and add descriptions. I think we created this criteria somewhat quickly, and maybe they just need definitions. Equity means a lot of things. We can define income and race, and and addressing the affordable housing piece. So, just due to time, just thinking of, I know that's something we've done in other meetings where somebody volunteers to work on something, and proposing that option that, maybe this just needs a little bit more time to have some eyes on it over the next few days before we go to our subgroups again.
Yeah, and thanks for that proposal. And the one thing that we won't have the ability to formally adopt anything after this meeting, and we're going to need to use those criteria to evaluate. So I think we as a group would need to, and I don't know about this, Cassie, but process-wise could deputize some people to add descriptions to these to redistribute, or would that be possible? And then not re-vote on it?
I think it's ultimately up to you all. I don't think that there's anything like legally that binds this group to having to vote on the criteria. I would just to me, it seems like you wouldn't want to significantly, we also haven't had an opportunity to really hear from people that want to add or change them, and we haven't completed the discussion. The other thing is that we really have very short amount of time even to do that additional discussion, because everyone needs to evaluate and then send it back to me before, and then that needs to be in enough advance time to get that all up in public before the actual public meetings. And that has to happen in a certain period of time. So it's kind of seeming to me like, rather than try to rush it in, you know, I guess I worry about not really having the amount of discussion that it warrants, and also still kind of running out of time. I mean, if the group really wants to try to do that, I think we can, but I think it's going to be really hard, especially given even just the turnover between that group meeting, sending it back to everyone, letting people vote themselves, and then have a public meeting. So there's a large part of me, now that we're 2 minutes over, that feels like we just need to finish this discussion at the next meeting and then bump the public meetings to the next month. But I would want to, I don't know how the group feels about that.
Yeah, I think I can't see anybody, but I think that is an important question of if we've had some time with this, but not a lot of discussion on each individual component.
Yeah, I agree. I think we shouldn't rush this. This is maybe the most important thing we're going to do for a while, to get these right, and it's going to suggest how we move forward for the next several years. So it's going to, and so trying to say, oh, we only have 14 minutes left in the meeting, let's decide. I think the criteria are good. I don't have a lot of anything to add to them. And one way you could do it is say, well, if you think that in the particular strategy that you're working in, that short-term and low effort wins is really important and equity is lower importance, that we have the choice to weight them. And that's one way to solve it. You just wait. If we accept these and we want to weight them differently, we can do that as individuals and as a group, as a subgroup. Otherwise, if we need to try to come up and make sure we've really got these nailed down, we better bring it back. I would agree with that sentiment. It's important.
Javi?
I just wanted to real quick. I do like Kirsty's idea. I'm just curious. So I think I do think we'll have to move it back just because that's what we'll have to do. But I am curious how many people will be interested in that kind of smaller group, because I know I would be. I'm just curious if it's going to be a smaller number enough to make it work, or if it's going to be a bit larger than our quorum. Can we just do a quick show of hands just so to see who would be interested in joining that group? So we have 3. Do we have any others?
And we could intentionally limit it to be able to have, to have a small group discussion, and then it would, that group would not be making any decisions or anything, and then we could discuss it at the next meeting.
Yeah,
So,
I'm happy to try to move that forward. Probably thank you for that, and Kelly, I see you as well. And I just want to remind the group that in our charter we have a step up, step back agreement that I think I would like to see us practice a little more in these meetings. So just throwing that out there as a reminder.
So since we are over time, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Since we're over time, it sounds like we are in a space where we're going to need to push the at least these next 2 steps of the process back. Hopefully, since we agreed on the process tool, sharing that with the group, everyone should be able to dive through that and understand that tool a little bit better, which I think honestly will help guide the priorities conversation. And we'll have some people, that small group, bring back some more detailed notes on each individual priority for us to discuss the next month's meeting. Is that a good summary of where we're at? And we'll have to delay the public evaluation meeting until right after the next group meeting.
So I'll send out another poll to get those scheduled. It'll be late June, early July. And that's kind of like a vacation time for people, but hopefully we can fit those in.
Okay, and we can try to figure out a new modified timeline too, Cassie, that fits. So we're not rushing things, but we also can just make our use of time as effective as possible.
Okay, great. And then I think so at the next meeting, that's when we'll try to vote for sure on the draft evaluation criteria with a little bit of extra working from that subgroup. And the other thing I might ask is that if anyone has ones they wanted to add, since we didn't really get those ideas on the table, like I want to just add this one or I want to subtract this one. Why don't you email the chairs and myself with that so that we can kind of make sure that we can try to anticipate the discussion a little bit more. Might help a little bit with just having the right amount of time and that kind of thing. You can still add them next meeting if you don't send them in advance, but if you have them at the top of your mind, I think it wouldn't hurt to for at least the chairs to know that up front.
All right. Thanks, everybody. That was a marathon ECC meeting. I still can't see anything. So
Thanks, Neil. We hear you.
Yeah, thanks.
Great.
So we're adjourned.
Can I?
Right?
Thanks, Neil.
Thanks, Neil.
Thanks, everyone. A lot of important work. So
Thanks
we're
for
in the
those
thick of
folks
it.
stepping up for the work group. That's great.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Okay.